Today in the lacrosse coaches discussion group on Facebook, there was a question about off-ball defense, mainly when the ball is being dodged from behind. And instead of kind of writing an answer, I figured I would just make a video because I feel like a lot of coaches and players really struggle with off-ball defense. I know I do. Defense, especially off-ball, is one of the hardest positions to play in lacrosse because in the slide and recovery system, once the slide goes, now we're man down, and if all of the other players are moving, keeping track of them is hard. But so I'm going to read you his question so that we can get a good understanding of what it is. I also talked to him a bit after. I'll kind of fill you in on some of the other little details. And then we're going to go into essentially the 3 to 4 biggest things for off-ball defense that have helped me teach my players how to play off-ball defense. So in his question, he wrote, looking for some insight on off-ball coaching points when the ball is at X. We're still working on our individual defense at X to get better, but unfortunately, we're getting beat clean too much. I've read some coaches go chest-to-chest off-ball, and so chest-to-chest is essentially when you are off-ball, the defense will be chest-to-chest communicating. It's not chest-to-chest with the offensive player because then you can't see anything and there's no way to react when something goes wrong. Not really getting a slide out of that type of off ball. We're not good enough on ball to play that way. We slide from the crease as our base, but trying to declare a hot man and work around him has been tough for our boys to grasp. Obviously, the first thing is to continue focusing on improving on-ball defense and driving away from the cage, but any insight on some off-ball coaching points would be appreciated. Leaning towards going to more of a near man concept as a slide. And so this video is going to focus mostly on the backside of the defense where you're going to be playing off ball. Now he is trying to lean towards more of a near man concept, which is a combination of an adjacent and crease slide defense based on specific things. And if you want to learn more about near man defense, you can go to POWLAX.com. All of the videos have now moved down to the bottom to this coach's corner menu. And so we'll go to coaching strategy, defense, and then near man defense. Now, once you're here, you can watch this video for free. If you want to download the printable playbook, you can. It's $9.99 a month or $99 for the year, which you get access to our school lacrosse coaching community if you do anything for a year. And then the best way to learn, I think, is to take the masterclass, which will add in the video, the playbook PDF, and then a quiz. And so once you get to this page, you can go to any of the parts that you want, and then you can take a quiz that will prove that you know what it is. I really like the quizzing aspect because it just confirms that you know it, and there are a lot of questions in here that are pretty difficult because you have to build the schematic in your head in order to be able to teach it really well to your players. So if that interests you, that's at POWLAX.com. Now, in order to discuss the concepts in general, the first thing we got to do is build the foundations. And so the first foundation is where you are on the field. And so for off-ball defense, we are preparing for this situation. What he's seeing most is that this attackman will dodge, he'll beat his man, and then they are sending a slide from the crease. Now, right here, obviously, we don't want to do this because M3 is wide open. And so we have to have what's called a 2 slide in. Now, when we begin this play back here, we might not know exactly who that should be, but there's another rule. But so basically one of these players has to be in covering the crease. And in order to be off ball, you got a pretty huge rule. The rule is you need to defend your guy and half of someone else's guy at a minimum. There's also another rule where if the dodge goes away from you, you want to spider to the middle of the field because from the middle of the field, you can get to the most places. So let's see what that looks like. Let's say in the same way, A2 dodges this way. Let's say he beats D2 like this. And now, as that dodge is happening, this player should be spidering into the crease. So should this player. And the reason being is because if this player goes, they can try to cover inside. And depending on what happens next, they could go to multiple points from the middle. Whereas if they stay on the perimeter, they got a really long way to go across the field. The other aspect of this is that however far away your guy is from the goal, you can be farther from them. But if they're in close to the goal, you have to be right on top of them. The next part we have when it comes to the foundation of off-ball positioning is your stance. And so if these players are going to have to react to whatever the dodger does, they have to see the dodger. And so what we like to teach is V to C, creating a V with your hands where you're pointing at the ball carrier and you're pointing at your guy so that you can easily turn to see both players. Now, in our schematic, what the V to C is referring to is that this player here will stick out both his hands in a V, pointing at A3 and then pointing at the attackman who's dodging. That allows him to see the play as well as everything else that's kind of going on. Now, when they're in that position, they want to make sure that they are closer to the center of the field so that if they do cut, they're at least defending the most dangerous part of the field. The final part is sideways. And so people call it pistols. People call it a bunch of things. You think about like Yosemite Sam shooting his guns off in both directions. If he's standing in a format where both of his pistols are pointed at M2 here and the dodger, he has the ability to turn his head to see both. Now, the other aspect of this from defensive foundations is the goalie. The goalie needs to have the ability to give hints to all the off-ball players. So that's positioning, like where is the ball? Is it back left? Is it at X? Is a dodge coming? And the goalie can give hints to the on-ball defenseman as well, but it's more important for the off-ball players. The on-ball defenseman needs to know when he's going to get to GLE, but for the most part, all the other stuff is what's much more difficult. So we have the foundations of off-ball positioning, where you are in the field, as well as your stance. And so if you want to see that a little bit more in depth, you can go back to POWLAX.com. You'll head down to the coach's corner again. We're going to go to coaching strategy, defense, and individual defensive play right here. And this video will teach all about approach angles, how to play off ball, why you're sideways, why you V to C in a way where you can actually see it on a real field. Now, the next part that we have to discuss is the strategy. Once guys are in the right places, how are we going to move once the attackman dodges and then draws a slide? And so the back end of your defense, the backside, can be manipulated way more than the on-ball defenseman and the slide. Now, in most man-to-man defenses, the entire idea of the man-to-man defense is when a dodge goes and they beat their guy, we are going to send a player who is close to that player so that we can help the on-ball defenseman. And now we end up with an odd situation on the backside. Now, for the most part, if it's a crease slide defense, we are going to slide from the crease. Now, if you're an off-ball player here, this requires a 2. And so 2 just means second slide. It can also mean 2 passes away from the ball, and they are covering 2 players. So you can see right here, D1 would be covering M3 and M1, and the LS7 would be covering M3 and M2. And so from here, if we slide, DM1 picks up the ball and takes him. Now D2 is going to recover in and then bump these 2 back once they have gotten rid of the danger of the original dodge. Now, another way that we could potentially slide to this is adjacent. And so as the dodge goes, if D2 gets beat, potentially we will slide from the side, which is now DM2. This does a couple things. First, if we're not sliding from the crease, we don't have to have our 2s in. We can press more adjacent and we can collapse really hard. Now, from this position, most people will never slide down like this, even though in man down, say you're in a box and 1, you will slide down like this. But if you come down to here, and now this player steps in, it's just an easy 1 pass to a shot. So if D1 off ball isn't ready to rotate down and have everybody rotate after that, and then the player who was originally on ball will go away from the first pass and end up on the opposite side of the field. For the most part, we won't do that at X just because it's too easy to create that advantage, especially with an easy clear through, where if A1 clears through and this guy leaves him, it's too hard for D1 to get in and pick him up. Like, it's possible, but it's just really difficult. Now, the last slide that we could potentially make when the ball is being dodged from X is called a coma slide, C-O-M-A, and it means come across the crease. So as A2 dodges and then beats D2. Now, as the dodge is happening, D3 has to spider in, which he should be doing anyway. And then D2 is going to try to overplay top side to push A2 back inside, where he will be met with the coma slide. Now, in any of these situations, we are worried about a singular idea. How do we send help and then recover back and match up again in less time than it takes the offense to score a goal or to take advantage of it? Now, regardless of which one of these strategies you use and how the components go to enable you to send a slide and not have someone be able to pass into the crease, now we get into our recovery situations, which it's hard to maintain coverage of everyone 5-on-4. And so as we make this outline, I'm going to show you what I would do in this situation, and then I'll explain why I like to use a zone on the backside instead of using any man-to-man tactics where you have to bump out to the same guy. So as A2 dodges to his left, say he beats D2, we are going to have D3 spider in. He'll become the 2 in a coma position as M3 is going to mirror. Now, if he cuts away and follows the slide, it's going to make it difficult. So we need to make sure that D3 is aware. We probably should have some help in from the LSM as well. Now, as we get to here, now, let's say D3 is the specific 2 and he gets all the way in. We are going to have 3 versus 4 coverage up top. And so this player, LSM, has to cover A3 and M2. D1 covers M1 and M2. DM2 covers A1 and M1. And now we are essentially going to let them do whatever they want, but we're going to cover anyone that comes into the crease. So even though that these players are in a zone, they're still going to cover any one of the players who they are playing as they come to the crease, because that is the most dangerous play. Now, if these players decide they're going to like switch places on the perimeter, or we have some people that aren't coming into the middle, we are still going to stay in our zones because there is still a player who we are defending in our zone. Now, if they leave their zones or they cut the middle, now we'll have to help out the other zones where the players went, because in a zone concept, we don't really care about the zones. We care about the players that are in those zones. And if no one's in our zone, we want to help out other zones. And so let's say that, you know, this player here decides that he is going to cut the middle. D1 is going to go with him and announce to the LSM that he is being cut through, that he's out of his zone. And so the LSM's responsibility remains M2 and A3. And if M2 kind of pulls over into D1's zone, he is still going to have to cover M2 and A3. And you may be thinking, man, this really looks like we're giving up a lot, but we already got beat. We already sent a slide. The worst thing we could let happen now is have a player pass into the crease and then get a shot from right inside. We would way rather have them throw the ball through and allow the LSM to play 2 than to do that. But so it is a zone concept in terms of the perimeter, but if someone cuts to the crease, we have to account for that player, because the odds of the 2 here being able to cover another player in the crease is pretty minimal. And so let's say they do something like they have this player kind of fade up field, maybe trying to bait this slide, which we're never going to do anyway. Now we end up with a 3-on-2 backside here. And let's say that this player is going to cut the middle. We want to make sure that D1 stays with him as he goes through this place, because he's more dangerous than M2. And so now we're left with the LSM on the backside covering 2. And if another one of these players cuts 2, he needs to cover the player that's closest to the goal, because they are going to be the most dangerous. Now, once we get into this situation, if A2 skips it through, now this builds our recovery situation. And now our recovery situation is going to be based on these 3 components. The first component is that as the player was dodging and as M1 cut through and D1 left his zone, that the LSM is aware and D1 communicates to him, hey, like, I'm out, I got to take my guy, so that the LSM spiders into the middle, because that's going to put him in a better position so that as the pass goes, we hit our first tactic, which is we have to get in his hands as quickly as possible, because if we don't and he's able to shoot with his hands free, that's a really good shot. He may be closer than this in real life. And so once we've gotten into his hands, we have bought ourselves some time, which is the second thing. And so the way you buy time on defense is, one, you can slow play, which means if someone is not dangerous, you let them get as close as they can without going, so that you shorten their decision-making window. So if someone's running into say it's a fast break, they're running into the defensive zone uncovered. You don't want to slide up field when you have to run a long distance. You want to play the game within the game, which is you want to leave at the moment where you would have to be there, because the longer you wait, the shorter the decision-making window is for the offensive player. And so by slow playing, you buy time and you make it harder for the offensive player. Now, in this specific situation, getting in the hands bought us some time. And during that time, D2 has to recover in. And now the third rule with recovering is that you never want to slide past your own player unless you have a very matchup based system where you know you have to go to specific players. Because if you've got to run past another player, we're just wasting time, which is the opposite of the second rule of buying time. And so from here, if M2 does make another pass, we want to make sure that D3 then gets out to play A3, and now we are rematched up. Now, within the recovery, depending on how fast the offense can move the ball, when M2 has the ball, the hard part here is that if D3 moves out early, he could be giving it up to M3 inside, which is an even worse situation if this player can catch it and finish. But so there's so many little reactions within the defensive concept that if you can create a system where players have the autonomy to make the mistakes, to get the examples, and to think through what's going on, they're going to be way better players, and everyone's going to be moving in the same direction instead of having it be a scripted thing that you prescribe to every situation. And that's how players get so much better, is because they have the autonomy, they understand how they need to communicate and work with each other, and now it's all about putting them in the situations where they fail so that they can learn and then become quicker over time. And so clearly there are a variety of ways that you can structure your off-ball defense through a slide and how you recover, but the point is that you have to get all of your players on the same page, because you can have whatever strategies you want, but if the players don't know what the strategy is or know how to run them and how each person affects the other, they're basically just going to be getting in each other's way, especially if they're all coming from different programs where you get them in and now you kind of have to teach them how we want to do it together. And so as coaches, we want to make sure that we are not just saying what the strategy, it doesn't matter if the coach knows the strategy, but for many coaches, they are just a total bottleneck because they are the only one who knows the strategies or has access to what they're trying to teach. And so you are limiting the players by the fact that they must spend 8 hours a day at school and then come out to practice and then kind of run around a bit, but then get back into the learning mindset while they're either standing on the side or in the drill, and that they have to not only try to learn the framework of what the strategy is, but also every single position where they're only getting auditory input and then maybe physically going through it, but you have to repeat it 100 times. And it's way easier if you can have tools on the side that players can actually access outside of practice to kind of learn the concepts so that when they come to practice, they have an idea of what they're going to be doing, so that then when the coach starts instructing them, they're working with a framework and they know what all of the parts of the framework are and which part of that they are. And so at POWLAX, I've helped thousands of coaches alleviate this bottleneck and help them learn the game better, as well as use tools to help their players learn. And when it comes to the players learning, the first thing that we have to understand is, how old are they? What level are they playing at? Because that's going to dictate which strategies you should try to put in, because you don't want to be trying to put in something that is way above their head. You want to put in something that's simple enough for the new players to do it and free enough for the experienced players to be unleashed within it. And so in order to let you know what those are, at POWLAX.com, we built a assessment that you can answer a bunch of questions about you and your team, and it's going to give you a readout of a bunch of videos that will work for your team. That way you're not spending a bunch of time watching meaningless drills that you can't actually apply to your team. But once the players understand, now how do we get them to move faster and be a more cohesive unit? The first way that we like to do it is we like to make sure that after every goal, everybody brings it in, and we need to discuss two things. Was it a lack of understanding that created the goal, or was it a lack of execution that created the goal? And when we're doing this, we have got a very specific rule about how you can communicate in that setting. And it's everybody has to say, I can or I will statements. And what this ends up looking like is, let's say you're the guy that got beat. You could say, I'm going to try to play him more straight up next time in order to just make sure that I get a bump. And then maybe the crease guy is going to say, I could slide on time next time. And maybe the goalie says, I can let you know that you're hot so that you know to slide. And the backside can say, I'll make sure I go in and I say, you can go so that you know that you can slide. But so in creating the I can or I will statements, you then clarify the communication that you're going to have in order to impact the other person. What you don't want to have, and what some teams always have, is goalie gets shelled by a pass that goes inside, and now he's just yelling at everyone, and that just doesn't work. So if you say I can instead of, just kind of complaining, it helps to give each player a reference to not only what they can do better, but also how they can use their voices to impact the awareness of other players in order to help us be a better team. And so once it all becomes about the only thing that the players can control, which is themselves, and how they may be able to impact a play that they weren't even really a part of, everyone begins to get the agency of the fact that their part matters. And that's another big part about lacrosse teams and just teams in general, is that everyone has a spot on the team. Even the kids that are riding the bench, when they practice, if they practice hard and they go hard like Rudy did, they add value to the team because when they're in, they give a different style of look. When you bring it in and you say something that you could do to contribute to someone else, your mind is on helping and building someone else and our team instead of just how someone wronged you by missing an assignment off ball. Now, the final piece of this, and probably the most important piece, is the recognition that awareness is almost more important than communication, because communication without awareness is completely worthless. It's pointless. Because if you don't know what you're seeing, how are you going to know how to react to it if you don't know what it is? But so when we talked about the foundations of these players kind of being off ball and what they're actually doing, their ability to be aware and see the right things is what is going to allow them to have the communication on the field, whether it's in the meeting at the goal or on the field when they're doing it, to help each other to be the best unit that you can be. Now, from a coaching standpoint, one of the mistakes that I see coaches making all the time is assuming that because something happened, the players are seeing the right things. And oftentimes they're not. They are not aware of what the situation is, let alone what they should be doing because of that. And so one of the ways that I like to address my players when they're in a situation where they did the wrong thing or they weren't on time is ask them, what did you see? Because if I can address what they saw during a specific play, I can then figure out if they're seeing the right things to know whether or not they even have the information to make the right decision. So if they're not seeing the right things, I want to point them towards what they should be looking for. And if they did see the right thing, but they were in the wrong position, now I want to train them on exactly what they should be doing in that situation. And so in a off-ball situation where we dodge, draw, slide, if someone gets back cut and the guy catches and finishes, instead of saying, oh, Billy, you missed your guy, what are you doing? I will say, Billy, during that play as the dodge was happening, what did you see? And he's like, well, I saw the dodge go, and then I missed my guy, and he cut behind me, and he scored. Cool. So you saw the right things. Now, how can you make sure next time you're not missing your guy. And he's like, well, I got to keep my head on a swivel. Cool, good. How long should you look at your guy versus the ball? And if I've taught him this yet, it would be 2 seconds on your guy, 1 second on the ball. So we call it big eye, little eye. Little eye is the ball when you're off ball. Big eye is your guy, because if the goalie's doing what he should do too and making me aware of where the ball is, I should be able to understand where it is and kind of how things are happening. Now, the fact that he knew what the situation was means now we can kind of train how to do it. But if he doesn't have that, I'm just wasting my time, and I'm very much so wasting my time by just yelling at it. Now we have a way of allowing the player to think through the options and then understand rather than have to be at a specific spot, which is the easy way to do it, right? Like, really good coaching is 1,000 conversations over the course of a season. And the conversations are short, they're subtle, they need to be with a point, and it needs to be exploratory. Like, I think that's one of the parts where, in my experience, when I was, just coming off of Mountain Vista, trying to coach Grandview, we put in a really simple play that allowed me to have conversations with the players where they were in control, but they had options and rules. As I continued to explore what I thought would be good offenses and defenses, I ended up making it more complicated where players had to do specific things, which got rid of their decision-making capability and then ultimately made us worse. So just to do a quick recap, we need to make sure that we build the foundations of off-ball positioning, stance, that we have a strategy that we know everybody is using that can be manipulated in the recovery in order to buy as much time as possible to send the recovery through and then rematch up. And then finally, we've got to make sure that we have open communication where each player on the field can be their own general and have their own autonomy within the context and structure of our strategy to allow us to explore it all together. And that's where you're going to see the biggest gains. If you build the agency for each player, they will be able to come together and create the right mechanisms that will help them be better and understand more exactly what they're trying to do. Now, developing an understanding is half the battle, because I understand how to do a push-up, but it doesn't help me if I'm not actually doing it. And so in order to create the best players at practice, we need them to play as much as possible. And the biggest thing that inhibits coaches from being able to let their players play more is the fact that the kids don't have the skills to control the ball and then think about whatever else they're trying to do on the field. Like, the brain to stick connection has to be there. And to get that, players have to put in work after practice. Now, encouraging players to work outside of practice usually looks like one of these two things. First, it's in the team meeting after practice. Hey boys, make sure you go do your wall ball outside. And then the other way is if a kid actually comes up to a coach and says, hey, coach, how can I get better? The coach will spend 2 to 5 minutes with them explaining what they should learn or what they should try to improve in terms of their individual skills. But then when the player gets to where they're practicing, rarely would they actually do exactly what the coach said, and they may just end up, shooting from 10 yards. And so over the past year, I developed something called the POWLAX Online Skills Academy. And what this allows you to do is incentivize, train, and track your players outside of practice. And so in terms of incentivizing the players, we use the gamification method, where as the players either log whatever work they do on their own or they actually do the workouts within the academy, they will earn points, they can achieve ranks, and then they can earn badges that show what they've actually done, so that they can get a feel for how, when they put work in outside of practice, when they come to practice, they can add more value to the team. Then in terms of the workouts that they do, each workout is a bunch of drills that I would run in my private lessons that will build specific skills. As they complete these, they're going to be building the skills that you actually need them to do. Now, even if a player doesn't have the entire academy, they can do 5 workouts that we just give them for free, and it's not a part of a trial. You just create an account and you have access to it, and they can do those 5 workouts as often as they'd like. And then if they do things like go shoot around with a buddy or do a private lesson, they can log their work that's outside of the academy and do a different style of points. And what this ends up giving you and the team is a leaderboard that tracks everybody's progress. And so every player is listed You can see whatever they're working on outside of practice, and each player on your team can see the other players and the work that they are putting in and their rank and all of the stuff that they have. Now, within the leaderboard, the way that I think about using it for coaches is coming to practice, having a printout of what this looks like, being able to tell the players who's done what and show them. But then the really cool thing is if you do the team totals, now everybody's little bit of work is contributing to an entire team's progress. So it gives the visual of all the players kind of rowing their own boats to improve their own skills, but then you see it as a team total because every time each player improves, they improve connecting to the other players, which allows everybody to get better together. And so it builds that team camaraderie, and you can really do whatever you want in terms of how you advocate for it and incentivize it, because you could do helmet stickers, you can do line drills with all the people who do the most work in the academy in a specific line where the players who are putting in the work get some type of benefit. And so whether you want to just track players wall ball or you want to give them badges to earn to build specific skills, it will allow you to have more effect on what the players do, because once they leave you, they're actually getting good training. And so if this is something that you feel that would be cool to give them for the year in order to get way better for the next season, go to POWLAX.com/academy, scroll down a little bit of the ways and click the more about teams button. And once you get here, you'll see all of the info. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you guys thought. Make sure to hit that like, subscribe button, and follow me on social media. Have a good one, and I will see you in the next one.